Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/Entitled People. In today's episode, Susan the Snack Stealer. We should have known better. Entitled friend, 45M, uses guilt to extort me and my wife for gifts, childcare, and cash for years. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. Susan the Snack Stealer. I used to work with a super entitled woman once upon a time. Her name was Susan. Susan liked to get to the office earlier than everyone else, but I didn't find out why that was until I'd worked there for a few months. She was the sort who liked to help herself to the snacks people had in the communal fridge. She'd also take individual sodas from the case my cubicle neighbor kept under her desk, and had a real thing for stealing either my chocolate or my good granola bars, depending on what I had stashed, right out of my desk drawer. She got her comeuppance one year at the office Christmas potluck. We had a lady who did Greek cooking and was magnificent at it. This particular year, she'd brought in an enormous tray of mini spanakopita, the spinach and feta cheese in phyllo dough. Each roughly the size of an Oreo cookie. Literally hundreds of these little beauties, stacked too high on the tray, just waiting to be devoured. And then along came Susan, with the Tupperware of holding. It you not, she scooped fully 1/4 of the contents of that tray into her Tupperware, looking around furtively to make sure no one would try to stop her. She brushed the phyllo crumbs from her fingers, popped the seal on her Y-size Tupperware, and turned smugly away from the buffet table. And every single person in the office was glaring at her, fit to set her permanently ablaze. Our office manager was particularly salty, because she, dear reader, was the Greek chef who had provided these delicious morsels. She spoke, and it was with the voice of a vengeful goddess. "Susan, what in the hell do you think you're doing?" And then, the foot tapping began. Tap. 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 And the hand on the hip. And finally, the finger of doom did aim at Susan, thief of treats, hoarder of spanakopita. And Susan did meekly open her Tupperware Y-bowl, and return unto the tray roughly 90% of the pita. Thus was the office manager appeased, and thus was Susan forever sneak-shamed. You have my upvote and my glee. Some places even fire you for such behavior. I have only seen visual proof of it twice in my middle-aged life, but yes, it does happen. Susan didn't get fired, but she was watched like a hawk from then on. I don't think she stole anything else during the rest of the time I worked with her. She transferred to another office about a year and a half following the potluck caper. All of my co-workers do this. If someone brings cake for 15 people, it's get eaten by 2 or 3 people in a matter of hours. We all work in pairs of 3/4 in different shifts. If someone brings candy or something else, they bring enough so every shift can eat it. But nope. By the time my shift starts, it's all gone, or a tiny scrap is left. One of my coworkers from my old job made this delicious dish of large shell pasta stuffed with chicken or crab, covered in Alfredo sauce. And she likes to bring like a big dish to work for everyone to enjoy. Now most of us knew like, hey, take 1 shell or 2. But because this other coworker was the only one there at the time, she decided to take like 1/3 of the tray. If I had been in my coworker's shoes, I would have totally gotten onto her for that. The food is for everybody, not just for her and to feed her kids at home. I worked with a woman who never contributed to our potlucks. And this wasn't a financial issue, because she would voluntarily tell you that she worked because she needed something to do. When she would contribute, which was as rare as a solar eclipse, it would be something like generic store-bought cupcakes or a bag of chips. She sure would always be first in line, though, usually before we were even finished setting up. Thankfully, I've never personally witnessed any Susans, but I've heard a few stories from our office manager. One woman we worked with would buy a giant stash of snacks for the office that she paid for out of pocket. She would refresh around once a month. So obviously chips and stuff lasted longer, but fruit was gone pretty quickly. Our office manager witnessed someone taking a whole bunch of bananas back to their own desk so they could have one every day. Another person left a sticky note complaining that the apples were too big. Nothing too egregious, but annoyingly funny. We should have known better. My husband and I had decided to rent out one of our empty bedrooms for a few months, as we are empty nesters and thought the extra cash would come in handy. We posted an ad and found what we thought was a suitable renter. His 2-week stay ended this past Sunday and was an absolute train wreck. The players in this melodrama are below, along with bullet points leading up to last weekend. T equals my husband. J equals renter. M equals very good friend, who is very protective of me. Within 4 days of moving in, Jay had gone through all of the soda I had put in the fridge that would normally last T and I more than a week, along with a jumbo box of microwave popcorn, our stash of frozen emergency meals, and a few other items. He swore he would pay us for these items when he received his weekly check. Spoiler alert, he never did. When Jay told us he did not have a car, M said he was willing to sell his beach cruiser for $50. T offered to pay for it, and Jay and I went to M's home to pick it up, and also so that M could meet Jay and put the fear of God, or at least of M, into him. Jay kept asking us to do things like pay for an Uber, hard no from us, calling him and asking him for money, Ubers and rides, again, hard no. M lives 20 miles from us and is a full-time caretaker for his disabled partner, and asking us to buy him food. T had a mandatory qualification event for his job and needed to pay $20 for supplies, totally normal for his industry. He made sure to have the cash in his wallet, but when he went to pay, the money was gone. Jay kept saying that his employer was cutting his hours and then giving them back. He was a bit iffy when we asked what his work schedule was. The poop really started to hit the fan on Friday morning. At around 0100, T's phone started to blow up. T works nights, but happened to be home with a stomach bug. It was Jay texting that he had been roughed up and was scared. T ignored his texts. We're Jay's landlords, not his parents or even his friends. To summarize the next 3 days. Jay came home with some sob story about being beat up by some bad gangbanger types who stole the bicycle. He lied that he had been on his way home from work as our ring system saw him leaving the house 2 hours before. Jay's cousin came by Friday evening to pick him up. The next time we heard from Jay was Saturday morning, when he told us he has lost his house keys while riding in an Uber. Jay came by the house with his cousin for a few minutes, before I had the chance to get new keys made. We told Jay in plain English that we had an event to go to that night, concert tickets, and would be leaving the house at 3:45 and would not be back until 11 that night. He still expected us to detour 10 miles in the wrong direction to give him the replacement keys. Just, no. I dropped T off at the house 11 and left to put gas in my car and pick up a snack for T. Jay called while I was out asking me to pay a bar tab. Again, no. When I got home I texted Jay that T would be going to bed at 12:30. If Jay couldn't make it home before then, we would see him on Sunday. Jay did come in at some point before T went to bed. When I got home on Sunday, Jay, obviously either drunk or hungover, told yet another sob story about how the bar he had been at had kept his phone when he didn't have the cash to pay his $40 tab. He wanted me to pay the tab as he had no cash and swore he would Zelle me the money as soon as he had his phone, as his boss had paid him that morning. I reluctantly agreed to retrieve his phone on the condition the first thing he would do when he got it was Zelle me the money. I paid the tab at the dive he had been at and was out of there in under 5 minutes. I gave Jay no time to order a beer, which pissed him off. When I gave Jay his phone and said he needed to send me the money immediately as agreed, he said his boss needed to release his pay before he could give me the money. Spoiler alert again, that never happened. Next, Jay asked to stop at an inexpensive Mexican fast food place, not a chain, to get a burrito. I said I would wait in the car while he went inside and he got his order to go. He ended up walking into the full-service Mex place next door, one with a bar. At that point I hit the bloody end of my rope. I called M, who went into hyperprotective mode and drive straight down to me. M ended up yanking Jay out of the latest bar, where he admitted in front of the bartender he had no money to pay the tab and had just expected they would let him walk out on it. After some talk between M, T and myself, M took Jay to a relative's house about 30 miles away while T and I cleared out his room and put his belongings on the curb, then notified Jay we had done so. His bathroom was in unspeakable shape, and we had to pay our cleaning service $150 to do an emergency cleaning. We also paid $400 to have our locks rekeyed, and changed the access code for our security system. Jay spent some time making wild threats. He tried to call 911 multiple times, but they kept shutting him down as he was very obviously drunk and out of control. We also found out that Jay had used the bicycle as collateral to pay off another open bar tab, that he was beat up on Thursday night/Friday morning by a Vago, very bad biker dude, because Jay was flirting with the guy's girlfriend, and that his boss had fired him for showing up drunk and stealing. There's a ton more, but this post is already too long. I actually hope Jay gets the help he so desperately needs and that I never lay eyes on him again. Apparently Jay thought what your life lacked was an unemployed, alcoholic, liar of a son you never had. I actually have a friend like that who I keep at a very long distance. I share housed for years and had my share of experiences with this type. I quickly developed a hard set of rules. What's the fascination with initials for everyone? Just type the words, it makes it much easier to follow the story. OP and OP husband are clearly well-meaning but inexperienced in dealing with deadbeats. Both OP/husband and deadbeat renter have serious boundary issues. Recommend that in future if you rent out the room make sure it is a business transaction and you never, ever get sucked into the renter's life again. Entitled friend, 45M, uses guilt to extort me and my wife for gifts, childcare, and cash for years. Hey everybody. First time posting here, but I had posted this in Entitled Parent and my IRL friends told me to post it here. I've been listening to a bunch of those narrated posts over on YouTube while I work and I wanted to share some experiences from a few years ago. These mostly involve me, 33 and B, my wife, 36F, a former friend of mine Aaron, 43M, and his son Ethan. These are set across a 6 or 7 year period. I have way too many of these, but consider these the greatest hits. Shortly after my mom kicked me out at the age of 17, the day after Christmas, don't worry, she'll have her own post eventually, after crashing with my best friend's family, I moved into my first place. It was an absolute slum, but it was only $200/mo total, utilities included. I wasn't there very long, but in that time, I had a couple of roommates but eventually my girlfriend, now wife, moved in. Anyway, by chance, we met an old friend of mine who had moved away at the grocery. We catch up, and after a few pretty solid days of hanging out, he introduces us to his friend group. One of these people is Aaron. Aaron was a decade older than the rest of us, but he was a big gamer, loved D&D, comics, fantasy novels, Star Wars, anime, etc., and was basically the older brother of that friend group, who were a bunch of 20-something nerds. My wife and I hit it off with him really well. Despite my description of him, he was a pretty charismatic guy. Well, after hanging out for a few weeks, he'd mentioned that he was the super of the building he lived in. He was in fact not the super, and that his parents owned the place, which was true. He let us know that the apartment across the hall from his was opening up soon and we jumped at the opportunity to get out of the hellhole we lived in. About a month later, we were neighbors. Things started out fine, for the most part. Aaron was recently divorced and his son, Ethan, who was 1 at the time, lived with him full-time. In the beginning, he worked at the local KFC and he got free rent from his parents, all he needed to pay was utilities. Well, for whatever reason, I honestly can't recall, he was let go from KFC. From that point on, Aaron wouldn't have a job for the next 4 years. Now, I'm not going to disparage anyone for not having a job. It's happened to me. However, Aaron, at the time, was more than capable of working. He just didn't. Instead, he played a lot of games, especially MMOs. He was always hitting up his guildies for cash or gifts. However, this got to the point where people would stop playing with him altogether. During this time, he'd often hit me and my wife up for money and gifts as well. On top of that, anytime we'd head to the groceries, he'd hand us gift cards and things and expect us to bring him home food too. Literally every time. I live in a very walkable city and don't drive, so we'd be carrying back food for this guy and his kid. Any time we didn't, he'd throw a huge tantrum, the dad, not the son, and talk about how we were taking food out of his son's mouth or punishing him for being a parent. Because my wife and I are child-free, he'd say we didn't understand because we hated kids. We don't hate kids, mind, and little Ethan was basically like a nephew to us. Every once in a while, he'd also convince some of our driving mutual friends to take him on grocery runs, but those only happened, maybe 2 or 3 times per friend because they wouldn't put up with him like we would. That all came to a head when he tried to guilt-trip some of our friends, streamers, on stream at 1 a.m. for not dropping everything to drive across town, pick him up, and buy him dinner. Yes, buy him dinner. This is 3 days after they bought him a $300 gaming chair because his fat ass broke his. That, and driving across town to build it for him too. When I say his fat ass, I really mean it, too. He was pushing 500 pounds. Now, I'm pretty heavy myself, a lot of my friends and family are. I completely get it. However, one of the things he did was constantly eat out. Really big meals at buffets, or ordering multiple pizzas, stuff like that. He said he liked cooking, but he basically never did. This did not help his weight and it very much didn't help his budget. During this time, and later, when he finally got his new, short-lived job, he was always asking my wife to watch Ethan while he went out to who knows where. We're talking 5 to 10 hours at a time, sometimes for days on end. She saw Ethan more than Aaron did. We were there for diaper changes, baths, potty training, meals, all of it. My wife basically raised him. All of this without pay other than him occasionally buying us some food. Because his divorce was insanely bad, his wife tricked him into having Ethan by lying about birth control, stole his car and crashed it, resulting in him losing his car and having his license revoked, and then cheating on him with his best friend and running away with him. He was super depressed all the time. He was allergic to mushrooms, so he would always say as soon as Ethan was graduated, "I'm going to buy some magic mushrooms and end it all." Really messed up stuff like that. His place was always torn up as well. The grossest place I've ever seen, and he'd convince my wife and me to clean it for him, once again using his son as a guilt trip. Somewhere along the line, he had let Ethan pee all over the floor and spill juice and stuff, so his carpeted floor was always covered in mildew. The bathroom was a wreck as well, covered in human waste, grime, and more. There were also toys and trash everywhere. Both he and his son slept on mattresses on the floor as well because they had to get rid of their bed frames. Why, you may ask? Because of the bed bugs. These bed bugs plagued our building for years, but he wouldn't report them to his parents because he said they'd kick him out if he, or we, did. He had a washer and dryer provided by his parents, unlike the rest of the units in the building, but the dryer broke about 2 years after we moved in, and he wouldn't report it to his parents for the same reason. This meant that he and his son wore wrinkled, mildewed clothes all the time. It got to the point where he convinced my wife to take their clothes whenever she went to the laundromat too, and, of course, she was paying. Somewhere along the line, he got bitten by a spider on his leg, which nearly had to be amputated due to necrotizing. This was apparently a combination of him not going to the ER soon enough and something about his diabetes. Luckily, after making all these plans with us to take care of him throughout his recovery, his leg was intact. However, he would then go on to use his rotting leg, his words, to milk more sympathy out of everyone around him. Thankfully, his dad, who also owned some local car washes, ended up hiring him to be a car washer to bring in a bit of money here and there. Don't get me wrong, his parents were abusive assholes, I get it, but after working there 1 year, he got into a huge fight with his dad about being late all the time and quit. At this point, his dad also started charging rent. Because of that whole debacle, we started making big meals for both households to keep his food costs down, all while still providing free grocery pickups, childcare, laundry service, cleaning, etc. By this time, Ethan was in school as well, so my wife would walk him to and from before taking care of him in the evening. We also started giving him $500/mo to help him get back on his feet, with the promise he'd look for a job. Right out of the gate, he said he wouldn't do anything that had him on his feet because of the rotting leg. Fair, I guess, but he also wouldn't work a temp job or at a call center. Also, because of not driving, it had to be within walking distance, but not too far because of the leg and his weight. So the only jobs he could do were online. So, instead of looking for data entry or something, he decided he wanted to be a streamer. That summer, his AC broke along with his oven. Again, instead of reporting it to his dad, the landlord who was responsible for these things, he begged me and my wife to pay for the fixes. Well, around this time, I got an offer to move into an apartment complex literally only 3 miles away that was exclusively for artists. I was a full-time artist, working in game dev and doing some freelance photography and graphic design on the side, so this was a huge opportunity for me. Well, guess what? He started guilt-tripping me and my wife about it, saying that if we moved away, he'd never see us again and that we were being unfair to Ethan. 3 miles. That's all. Honestly, I guess he was right, but I'm getting ahead of myself. By this time, all of my friends had had enough of him. They figured he was fun enough to hang out with, but he started being a dumb to all of them too. Like, for instance, storming out of multiple D&D games because he didn't like how they were going and not playing for months before coming back like nothing ever happened and then doing it all again. No one but me and my wife would even talk to him after all that. So, knowing what an opportunity moving into this artist collective would be, my friends had an intervention with me. They explained that I was being manipulated, and that instead of helping him and his son, I was being an enabler and that I needed to move and support my family. Well, with much protest from Aaron, we moved. However, I would still go for visits, and my wife still occasionally sat for Ethan. We also still paid him $500/mo. That was, until I gave him a cookbook about cooking on a budget and he lost his shit. I told him that I really wasn't comfortable with him wasting all the money I gave him on junk food and that he should at least try to cook healthy for him and his son. At this point, Ethan was getting bullied for being overweight and his teachers had started saying things. I told Aaron that I wasn't going to enable him and that if he wanted my help, he was going to need to make changes. He was furious, saying I was just like his dad, who had abused him physically, psychologically, and financially his entire life, and that he was going to do whatever he wanted with his money, and that if I stopped paying him that I was abusing his child. He told me that if I was going to do that, he'd never speak to me again and that that would be unfair to Ethan. I straight up told him that that was bull and that we can still be in each other's lives, but at this point I felt I needed to remove money from the equation, and he told me that I was making this decision to never see him again. But that was enough. I told him to have a good life. A few years later, I got a phone call from him asking about helping him get into his Minecraft account, which I had gifted him, but I couldn't help, and also I got a message from Ethan asking if we could see each other. I didn't respond because I didn't want to risk being manipulated by his dad again. I literally still get stress nightmares about him nearly a decade later. I know that a lot of this was my fault for not setting boundaries, but I didn't know that at the time. I'm just trying to move on now. And that move I made? Best thing I've ever done. The collective helped support my indie game studio, so we're doing good things, including showcasing at the freaking Smithsonian, and now I'm the property manager for the building and I also manage their community gallery. Seriously life-changing stuff. I hope this was a good post. If you'd like more about Aaron, like the time he bashed a door into my head repeatedly because I wouldn't take Ethan to the movies on our adults-only trip, him, me, my wife, and another friend, despite his sister agreeing to babysit, let me know. Thanks for reading. Edit, here are a few common things that have come up in the comments and I wanted to clarify. CPS was involved. Ethan was considered a happy, healthy kid and CPS has limited resources. Aaron didn't beat him. Didn't even spank him. Compared to most of their cases, CPS was fine with all this. They just gave lists of things to be improved that always were by their next visit. Yes, Aaron was a shitty person, but low on the totem pole by CPS standards. The reason I put up with this is largely because this started basically right after high school for me. Up until that point, I was living with my own abusive, narcissistic mother. Aaron made us feel like he was family and, before we knew it, I'd slipped back into a similar situation like the one I was in with my mother. Abuse sucks and doesn't always make sense unless you've lived it. As for my wife, her story is her own and I won't speak on it. This was many years ago. Now that we're out, my wife and I have had therapy and have grown to the point where we can set boundaries and cut out parasites like Aaron and my mom out of our lives. We've moved on. I didn't post this for sympathy or pity. This was a lifetime ago for me. I posted it because I recently dove into listening to a bunch of these narrated on YouTube and they reminded me of my former situation, and I hoped you guys would get something out of hearing my account the way I've gotten something out of listening to others. Why would you give this lunkhead $500 monthly? And he sounds like a disgusting slob who's unhealthy to be around. I feel sorry for his kid though. No, I don't want to hear any more stories about this clown. I'm not gonna lie, Aaron is a huge asshole, but I have absolutely no pity for people like you. You let someone walk all over you and your wife, and for some strange reason you let it keep happening, for years at the time it seems. He def needs therapy, but so do you and your wife. You need to learn self-respect and to be a bit more selfish. No sympathy. You could have grown a spine and said no, instead you and wife put him on a $500 per month stipend. You did that to yourselves. No one bothered to call the CPS when Aaron had no income or when the apartment had bedbugs? If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.